Brainwashed, Challenging the Myth of Black Inferiority by Burrell. Chapter 5, Homey-cide. Why do we keep killing each other? Look, you hear about people getting killed all the time. Little kids, teenagers, grown folks. Somewhere along the way, you stop feeling surprised. That's just black folks, you know. You can't afford to get upset because that's just the way it is. And I don't see it changing anytime soon. Do you? A quote from Nettie, a 58-year-old child care provider. Like specters in the Roman Colosseum, millions watched the horrific images broadcast on the news programs or streamed on the internet. They saw what police described as an escalated dispute between two factions of the south side of Chicago. There, in broad daylight, on a busy street, black teens were engaged in a battle, cracking heads with railroad ties, smashing faces with balled fists, and denting bodies with well-aimed kicks. As the gang-related melee came to an end, Darion Albert, a 16-year-old honored student, lay on the sidewalk barely conscious. He had been struck repeatedly on his head with a tore-up old plank. As Darion crumpled to the ground and rolled in agony, several barbarious young men gleefully kicked and stumped him more. Screaming teenage girls and grown women rushed to help the downed boy. Car horns blared as the urban gladiators clashed. Adrenaline drunk boys ducked in and out of fist-throwing clusters, some laughing as if engaged in a high school football game. Darion was taken to a local hospital, where he was pronounced dead. As news spread about Darion's death, sympathizers placed teddy bears and flowers outside his family's home. Relatives and friends, some wearing t-shirts bearing the boy's photo, held a vigil to share their grief. The boy's grandfather, Joseph Walker, told a reporter he planned to pray for the boys who killed his grandson. Media pundits, authors, and commentators assumed predictable positions blaming racism or race baiters. Days after the beating, police arrested and charged 4 teens ages 14, 16, 18, and 19 for the murder. This was a case of swift justice and national outrage. Sadly, neither was due strictly to the fact that another black child died senselessly. Each year, thousands of black children die violent deaths in this country. The reaction to Darion's death was mostly because millions watched the murder on the internet. Overwhelming silence is the standard reaction to such senseless deaths. Why does it take live footage of a murder to get to the Coliseum to care? Woozy would have cared. It was 1986, during Detroit's so-called Summer of Blood. Woozy Olasula, a 16-year-old high school basketball all-star, had just finished a hard shift at the neighborhood's Hardee's restaurant. Plans to visit his girlfriends were altered forever when Woozy found himself caught in the middle of a shootout. One of 4 bullets that crashed into his body lodged into his spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed. Though confined to a wheelchair, Woozy rode himself around Detroit mean streets speaking to thousands of urban youths about the dangers of gun violence. 10 years after he was shot, he co-founded Pioneers for Peace, a volunteer anti-violence awareness group composed of people disabled by gun injuries. A president of the group, Woozy visited classrooms, auditoriums, and after-school programs preaching the gospel of nonviolence and sharing the story of how his college hoop dreams ended in a nightmare created by yet another angry young brother with a gun. Serving as a visible reminder of senseless and deadly violence, Woozy joined Bill Cosby during a Detroit anti-violence rally in 2005 and participated in several other Madsen's events, such as the Million Man marches in Washington, D.C. Yet in 2007, when the NAACP called for a mass protest, Woozy stayed home. The rallying cry was in support of 6 black Jena, Louisiana high school students charged with beating a white student. The incident was the culmination of several racially tense fracases that occurred after nooses were hung in the courtyard of Jenner High School. Tens of thousands descended upon Jenner to protest the perceived excessive and discriminatory punishment leveled against the black youth. Woozy could not quite wrap his head around the NAACP's priorities. When comparing black folks' passionate response to white injustice and our collective silence with black-on-black violence, the response to the Jenner 6 case seemed like an overreaction. Woozy said, "I was amazed so many folks from here went down there. It made my heart weep. We can't even get parents to visit their kids' schools. Can you imagine what it would be like if we could put that kind of energy into gun violence issues?" That sort of energy would have been a refreshing change for some of today's traditional civil rights organizations. How many cities where young children were shot dead did the security leaders fly over to get to Jenner? More folks were moved to action by a case of white-on-black injustice than they were over black-on-black murder. Simply put, it was another instance of symbolism over substance. Woozy Alalusa passed away in early 2009 after losing a courageous battle against bladder cancer. The major issue he fought so valiantly to eradicate since his own shooting still plagues American urban community. Almost where the senselessness of black-on-black violence is the cancer of silence that allows it to continue unabated. Gates to nowhere. 7 months after President Obama's inauguration, the once cool, hot-button issue, racial profiling, got pushed. It unleashed a relentless media circus. Passions and pronunciations were at such a fever pitch for weeks that during a press conference, the first black president had to detour from questions about his health care reform initiative to address the issue. On July 16, 2009, renowned Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates was arrested at his own home by a Cambridge police officer who had responded to a call about a possible break-in at Gates' premises. The reaction to the arrest mostly fell along racial lines, with most blacks convinced the case was another example of racial profiling and excessive policing of a black person. Many whites, on the other hand, insisted Gates' insolent attitude, abrasive accusation of racism, accelerated the tension that led to his arrest. While all this dead-end back-and-forth debate consumed American attention, an 8-year-old black Indianapolis boy life ended tragically. On July 22nd, Jeremiah Williams was accidentally shot in the head while playing outside his apartment complex. Media report states that the 27-year-old suspect came to the area armed and ready to settle differences with an 18-year-old who was also shot but survived. 3 days after the boy's death, I typed Gates, police, and Cambridge into Google News search engines and got almost 9,000 results. Moments later, I typed in Jeremiah Williams, Indianapolis, and shot. How many results did I receive for the child? 1. Although the numbers would have serially increased had I used a regular search procedure that includes blogs and online commentaries, I'm reasonably certain the 9,000 to 1 ratio would have remained a constant even with an expanded search. Besides, I was interested in what was labeled news, not online chatter. And it was clear that the incident involving Gates was newsworthy while little Jeremiah was not. What happened to Professor Gates shouldn't have been labeled news. It's an everyday occurrence, part of being in Black America. If a racial profiling by police ended tomorrow, it still wouldn't change the homicide rate. As Woozy Olusulu observed, our priorities are drastically out of whack. How many young Jeremiah Williamses lost their lives while black folks wrestled with their emotion, passionately debated, and quiet fretted about Skip Gates? News and no news. Unlike high-profile cases of murdered children, such as 6-year-old beauty queen John Bennett Ramsey in 1996, or 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony in 2008, the deaths of black children received little to no media attention and limited nationwide black outrage. The skewed media attention doesn't just apply to black children. The deaths of white women receive far more media treatment than those of black females. Thousands of black lives, and male and females, are snuffed out annually through violence, yet there are few call-outs for nationwide rallies to stem this form of American genocide. Just weeks before the noose hanging incident in Jenna, Louisiana, a heinous murder in Atlanta of a Morehouse College student received scant mention on black radio and in the white media. Carl Walker, Jr., a 2,000-year-old junior, was beaten, tortured, stabbed, and then bound and stuffed in the trunk of his car and left to die. 4 men accused of his murders were and have been Morehouse men, a distinction thousands have worn with honor. According to the Associated Press, the police said they believed the killers were after $3,000 insurance settlement check Cornell was expecting. Had young Cornell been tortured by white supremacists, as with James Byrd, who was dragged to death behind a pickup truck in Jasper, Texas in 1998, we can be assured there would be national indignation. Have Cornell been shot by cops, as was Sean Bell, an unarmed 23-year-old New Yorker failed in a hail of 50 gunshots on the day he was to be married, Atlanta college students, as well as 1,000 of other African Americans, would have taken their outrage to the streets and to the internet. My brief online experiments with Jeremiah Williams and Professor Gates illustrates the effectiveness of the BL brainwashing campaign. African Americans are stuck in deep denial about black-on-black killings. We buy into media diversions like the Cates case that keeps us instantly talking about white-instigated racial incidents while black kids sitting on the front porches, lying in beds, or playing in front of homes. Cease to exist due to random gun violence instead by blacks. It seems we are more consumed with how whites treat us and less concerned or even number out about how we treat each other. Could it be because many blacks are so convinced that white people are superior, and therefore their opinion of us and action towards us are more important than our actions and opinions of ourselves? In the spirit of Wuzi Alasula, we must consciously adjust our priorities and dedicate the necessary energy to the scourge of black homicide, violence, and disproportionate death. Here, we explore why African Americans kill and die at such unbalanced rates, and why most African Americans are still reluctant to speak up or take actions in the face of a national epidemic. Dynamics of death. You have a killing subculture of black young men pretending to be men by killing each other. Jim Brown, founder of Amer I Can, from the documentary Crips and Bloods, Made in America. Blacks are just 13% of the population. Yet, according to a 2005 Bureau of Justice Statistics reports from the U.S. Department of Justice, we account for about half of all countries' homicide. Recent statistics do indeed show the magnitude of the deaths, but they don't fully detail the underlying forces that fuels these disproportionate rates. Homey-cide dynamics. Murdering minors. Young people, gang affiliated or not, who killed at an astronomical rate. A 2007 Justice Department study confirmed that more than half of black murder victims, 51%, were in their late teens and 20s. Comparatively, just over a third, 37% of whites murdered during the same period were between the ages of 17 and 29. Death for respect. Unplanned aggression that leads to death. Homicide for insignificant reasons such as insults, arguments, or feelings of disrespect. The traffic altercation, the shoulder bump, the "you insulted me, therefore you must die" madness prevails. For homies, for homicide involving black victims for whom the circumstances could be identified, 69% were not related to felonies. Of these, 56% involved arguments between victim and the offender. In most cases, the instigating factors escalated from the emotional and artificial concept of respect. All in the family. Spouses and intimate partners who kill. Black men take the lead in homicide statistics as both victims and perpetrators. Our rate of domestic violence where spouses and intimate partners kill each other is far greater than any other ethnic group. Black males are not the only most likely victims of homicide. They dominate as killers, especially in taking the life of another black male. See no evil. Blacks often ignore or fail to address black on black violence. There is an increasing collective numbness to black violence and murder. Black on black violence has become the new norm in our communities. This empathy or deadness devalues black life and contributes to the skyrocketing rate of violence, especially among our young people. These death dynamics, backed by national trends, present an ugly truth African Americans live are snuffed out at levels no sane civilized community should tolerate. However, buried within this truth lies in an unexplored link to America's original sin that put the madness in motion and keeps the BL addicts living up to the predetermined expectation. Roots of violence. Every day, that's my diet. A spoonful of hatred. It's just a question of when is this going to erupt, and upon who is it going to erupt. Am I going to attack myself, or am I going to attack my brother? Point is, I'm a walking time bomb. I'm going to go off someday, somewhere, on somebody. The question is, upon whom? A quote from a Homey-cide activist, a former gang member, from the documentary Crips and Bloods, Made in America. The acclaimed All God's Children by New York Times correspondent Fox Butterfield should be mandatory reading for anyone seeking to understand how America's violence past has tainted future generations. Assigned to profile Willie Bosket, once considered the most violent prisoner in the New York prison system, Butterfield traced the man's family history back to the slave era, where he discovered a cycle of violence that was transmitted across generations. Butterfield's book details the black man's pathology not rooted in Africa, but embedded in a legacy of Scot-Irish violence that thrived around Edgefield, South Carolina. Butterfield detailed a violent Southern code of honor in the Bosket family tree that included deadly duels over the smallest insult. Mental health experts are in general agreement that persistent exposure to humiliation, brutality, and abuse or physical or emotional can program people to humiliate, brutalize, and abuse others. Apart from the indigenous people of this country, no other ethnic group has been subjected to the centuries of abuse that Africans and their descendants have experienced. In spite of us, most African Americans have never committed a violent crime. Since we were first brought to this country in chains, we have resisted, rebelled, and refused to be sucked in by the negative messaging designed to debase us, both physically and mentally. The end of itself is the great miracle, a testimony of the resilience of the human spirit to triumph over the most degrading of circumstances. Still, vestiges of degradation remain very much alive, and our struggle to make amends with the twisted, physically and mentally debilitating past is far from over. Murder and savagery is as much a part of America's fabric as are in romanticized renditions of westward's expansion and innovative economic and social revolutions. Blood has stained the lives of millions who migrated to the new country. In other words, we didn't create the violence. It created us. The badass Negro. If you ain't from where I'm from, fuck you. That's just how it is where we from. That's the whole motto. Kill or be killed. A quote from Big Gurch, gang member from the documentary Crips and Bloods, Made in America. Historian tells us that not all slaves were compliant and docile. Some men and women refused to keep their anger and rage in check. The so-called bad nigger, an iconic figure in African American folklore, has deep roots in slave society. Living in a world that did its best to break spirits, those known to be defiant, mean, and not to be messed up were, with word, treated as heroes by other slaves. The bad black man refusal to follow the rules and willingness to fight back if provoked was his badge of courage, even if it ultimately resulted in death. Eugene Genovese, in a Roll Jordan role, The World That the Slaves Made, writes that the best of these men were the ones most dramatically saying no and reminding others that there are worse things than death. No people only lacking such an attitude can expect to survive, but the aim remains to live and not to die heroically. Owners sometimes encourage their slaves to be ferocious. The Battle Royale, a throwback of the gladiator fights of the Roman Empire, was a popular form of white entertainment in which slave owners would have their strongest and male slaves blindfolded into a ring and force them to fight each other until one man was left standing. Observers placed bets on the project winner and victor's owner pocket with the winnings. The contest was a divisive sport designed to pit black men against one another and humiliate them further by forcing them to stumble blindly in front of juries of crowds as they beat themselves to a bloody pulp. The Battle Royale, graphically depicted in the opening chapter of Ralph Ellison's classic, Invisible Man, continued long after the abolishment of slavery and well into the 1930s. Smokers were common pre-events during major boxing matches. Even then, the pugilists in these spectacles were always black men. Blacks have maintained attitudes that help us tolerate and endure slavery. Some of those adopted attitudes, however, such as black-on-black violence and stubborn, nihilistic posturing, serve no purpose in the 21st century. These days, we kill because we swallow the BI campaign's messages. We are inferior, we are less than, black life has no value. Baddest man in the whole damn town. Fear kept many blacks on the straight and narrow. As a substitute for confronting white power, many others turned to drinking, gambling, and ultimately fussing, fighting, maiming, and murdering each other. Indeed, the harshness, frequency, and high visibility of punishment under slavery and afterward created a climate in which being bad in white's eyes, even to the extent of criminal behavior, carried the stigma. Slave and free black communities not only protected but also revered the rebel. It was an environment where the black bad man, mean, evil, thoroughly incorrigible, was nurtured and could flourish. It's impossible not to make the connection between the brutality in the outer world and the brutality that's for some came to define their private lives. Dr. Benjamin Mays, mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the longtime president of Morehouse College, opens his autobiography, Born to Rebel, describing how the tyranny in the South Carolina town 9060 influenced blacks of that era. I believe to this day that Negroes in my county fought amongst themselves because they were taking out on other Negroes what they really wanted but feared to take out on whites. It was difficult, virtually impossible, to combine manhood and blackness under one skin in the days of my youth. To exercise manhood as white men displayed it was to invite disaster. And all God's children, Butterfield paints a compelling portrait of Willie Bosket's great-grandfather Pud. At that time, the baddest man in the Soledad country, South Carolina, and just a few miles from where Benjamin Mays grew up. Pud never initiated a fight, but as a relative to Toad Butterfield, if you pushed him, he had to beat you. Step on his foot at a dance or walking by, just brush him and there'd be a fight. The Badass Black Man, a musical theme, lit it through time. It was celebrated in blues ballads like Bad Leroy Brown, or Staggerly. The 19th century black pimp who killed a man and a boy as he begged for his life. The theme blasted loud in black 1970s films such as Superfly, Slaughter, Trouble Man, and Shaft, which produced a song about one bad mother. Shut your mouth, black film detective. Considering the adulations of the dangerous ass-kicking Negro, is it any wonders why today rappers prodigies like 50 Cent lyrically resurrect this deadly persona? I make a 187 look easy. Fuck that. I lay my murder game down. A quote by 50 Cent. Song, Curtis 187. No law, no order. I know where your kids and your wife be. Wife be bust a nigga head to the white meat, white meat. A quote from Lil Jon and the East Side Boys. Song, White Meat. Through slavery, Reconstruction, and Northern migration, the era of Jim Crow rule and legal segregation, and many will argue in these modern times, representatives of the law have been willingly accomplices in containing, beating, oppressing, lynching, and murdering black people. Where law was adulterated, some blacks created their own system of order. In the last quarter of the 19th century, sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois also observed that crime amongst blacks, once rare, has increased dramatically. A distinct black criminal case was emerging in the cities. Du Bois noted that some blacks preferred to live outside the law because they saw no point in living within the law. Many blacks came to regard the justice system as a structure of dualities. Influenced by white superiority, the system was crafted to punish blacks who committed crimes against whites more severely than those who committed crimes against fellow blacks. Arguably, swift and often cruel punishment for blacks who murder whites serves as a deterrent. However, if one accepts that theory, then the one flip side of the hypothesis may also apply, as authors Sean L. Gabaldon and Helen Taylor Greene explored in their book, Race, Crimes, and Justice. To the extent that homicide is a preventable or deterrable crime, one must examine the role of enforcement authorities in the genesis of black homicide. Leniency in the treatment of blacks, intra-racial or within the race, offenders may tend to encourage black-on-black aggression. Dying for respect. Don't step on my reputation. My name is all I got, so I got to keep it. I am a man of respect. The words of Willie Bosket's great-grandfather Pud reflect the attitude of many young black men today. Respect represents something worth protecting or risking your life or another's life over. For far too many young black men to be dissed is considering a kill or be killed affront. Slavery and the country's addiction to race-based violence is no excuse for the murderous behavior of blacks today. However, to fix a problem, you have to understand its roots. Exploring the antisocial mores of values, as well as the societal as legal injustices, help us connect the dots between the daily code of honor of yesteryear and the nihilistic code of respect defiantly practiced today. Through slick propaganda, the criminal code of respect is referred to as a black thing. The message that black men or America's Demons is peddled relentlessly on the nightly news and crime shows and through entertainment media. These messages hit black boys everywhere, on the basketball court, in the schoolyard, and when they gather on the street. Negative media reinforcements not only influence how cops, judges, employers, and others view black males, they affect how young blacks view themselves. The socialization process is the means by which children learn societal and behavior rules. It helps them determine and develop sets of beliefs, values, and attitudes about themselves, culture, family, society, and ethnic groups. Family and other institutions are major transmitters in the social learning process. However, as Gordon L. Berry stressed in his article on the media effects of black youth in contemporary society, the phenomenon of mass communication competes with these traditional socializing institutions. In other words, the media, television, films, video games, music videos are all major socializers. Television, in particular, has maximum impact on child socialization, especially if the values or views recur if they present in a dramatic form that invoke emotional reactions. They link with the child's needs and interests, and if no standard friends, parents, environment is supplied to counteract what offered by television. According to the National Institute on Media and the Family, exposure to the media violence is positively related to aggression behavior, aggressive ideas, arousal, and anger. In 2001, Iowa State University researchers concluded that violent music lyrics increase aggression thoughts and hostile feelings, and that young people who play violent video games, even for a short period, are more likely to behave aggressively. It's a known fact that blacks consume much more television than whites. Berry cited several studies indicating how black children use television to learn new facts and information about life, and to learn how people behave, talk, dress, and look. The scary reality is that the black children perceive media-fed behaviors as true reflections of life. In a society created to reinforce white superiority, the intended benefactors receive balanced messages of good and bad, destructive and constructive, real and unreal. For blacks, there are no filters that say, this is pretend. Many of our children consider media messages and images that authentic reflection of who we are. Black men are the descendants of a race that, due to skin color, has been systematically denied opportunity to meld into mainstream society. Therefore, for those with little self-esteem who feel they have nothing else of worth, honor becomes everything. Without it, they would spiritually bankrupt. Young black people have no idea on this warped mindset is dictated by a script drafted for their demise century before they were even born. Prison, a peculiar institution. Part of the mechanics of oppression people is to pervert them to the extent that they become the instrument of their own oppression. A quote from a Kumasi activist, former gang member, from the documentary Crips and Bloods, Made in America. No parent needs to be reminded that black boys suffer greater consequences for their missteps. They are incarcerated at higher rates and more frequently than whites who commit similar offenses. Of the 2.3 million people currently in the nation's prisons, 60% are racial and ethnic minorities. For black males in their 20s, 1 in every 8 is in jail or on any given day, according to the Sentences Project. In early 2009, Virginia Senator Jim Webb, a staunch proponent of radical prison reform, cited sobering statistics about the incarceration of African Americans. For instance, even though there is little statistical difference among racial groups regarding actual drug use, blacks, who make up roughly 12% of the nation's populations, account for 37% of those arrested on drug charges, 59% of those convicted, and 74% of all drug offenders sentenced to prisons. Thanks to a society structured to protest and expand white superiority, white teenage boys who get into trouble are far more likely to receive lighter sentences, treatment, and rehabilitation for their crimes. On the other hand, black boys more easily end up in jail or juvenile detention. In fact, as Marion White Elderman, founder of the Children Defense Fund, noted, more and more of those who enter the prison pipeline starts with the arrest record as young children. Elderman questioned the sanity of the nations willing to spend more on prisons than on Head Start programs. She sounded an alarm about a disproportionate number of black boys who are heartlessly trapped in a youth detention culture permeated with cruelty, with their focus is often on control and punishment instead of rehabilitation. To illustrate her point, Elderman cited data from the 2003 U.S. Department of Justice investigation into conditions at Oakley and Columbia juvenile training schools in Mississippi, where juveniles were hogtied with chains, physically assaulted by guards, sprayed with chemicals, forced to eat their own vomit, and put in dark, solitary confinement cells after being stripped naked. The Mississippi juvenile centers may be extreme cases. However, conditions at such sites reflect the results of a rapidly expanded prison system, a 500% increase over the past 30 years according to the Sentencing Project. It is a system clogged with the targets of the nation's 25 plus year failed war on drugs. That in reality is more of an orchestrated war on poor, uneducated blacks and Latinos. When examining the skyrocketing black homicide rate, we must consider how black boys learn to become hardened criminals through exposures to adult criminal mentors in prisons. We have to scrutinize a society that creates a prison industrial system that spits out deadlier and more contemptuous offenders that went in. The nation's prison system is the modern-day equivalent of slave plantations, a system where poor black have no rights, no real justice, and are openly treated as animalistic, inferior human beings, killing us quietly. If for nothing else but survival, generations of blacks have been astute observers of white power structures. This explains why many of us cringe when we hear news accounts of horrendous black-on-black crimes or hesitate to publicly condemn blacks who kill blacks. Deep down, we fear that whites, especially those seeking to validate their sense of white superiority, will judge us all by the negative actions of a few. Black leaders and individuals are hesitant to endorse any stereotype that feeds into cemented racial perceptions. In our homes, churches, and among ourselves, some of us do talk about the senseless acts of violence. However, publicly we still wear the mask of duality, clinging to the ludicrous notion that we keep our dirty laundry in the hamper. We will, however, moan and wail about a lost life in front of the news cameras and deliver teddy bears to the porches of murderers' children. We perpetuate the myth. If we expose the founding fathers' contributions to American creation of the heartless monsters roaming 21st century's concrete jungles, we're afraid we might be dismissed as radical, paranoid, or stuck in the past. What we won't do is recognize that, collectively, we have the inherent power and responsibility to address black-on-black violence. We can't talk about change without first discussing America's original sin and the system that set this whole destructive cycle in motion. It's imperative that we retrace the tracks before boarding the solution train. Homey-cide, connecting the dots. Contemporary manifestation side and the historical root side. The first point on the contemporary manifestation side, murdering minors, young people gang affiliated and not who kill at astronomical rates. Historical root side, slaves were taught to devalue black life, and this is a value we pass down to our children. Personal oppression, generalization poverty, illegal drug trafficking, gangs, and self-hatred create a kill or be killed code of respect among young people. Death for contemporary manifestation, death for respect. Unplanned aggression that leads to death. Homicide for insignificant reasons, such as insults, arguments, or feelings of disrespect. The historical side, stripped of responsibility and dignity through humiliation, ridicule, and physical and psychological trauma, we were left with shattered egos and pent-up rage. We became hypersensitive to any emotional trigger. All his contemporary manifestation side, all in the family. Spouses and intimate partners who kill black males are most homicide victims and most killers of other black males. Historical side. From the very beginning of our American experience, there was a welling up of violent rage and self-hatred within us. The easiest target for black rage of self-hatred is those closest to us who cannot retaliate. Contemporary side. See no evil. Blacks who ignore or fail to address black on black violence. A collective numbness to black violence and homicide. The historical side. Black men and women have become immune to intra-racial violence. Shutting down is an effective psychic defense. The fact that all blacks are judged by the negative tendencies of a few forces many to repress public outrage. All costs, no benefits. Analyzing the temporary benefits versus the long-term cost of homicide is a wasted exercise in this chapter. Frankly, there are no benefits to be derived from following the daily code of respect, defying the law, or through the violent release of pent-up emotions. The costs, on the other hand, are overwhelming. There's no upside to living in communities where daily violence rages out of control. We cannot keep burying our young. Our race will never heal as long as we allow or ignore senseless killings and violence. Black on black violence must be denormalized in real life and pretend life. Look at almost any dramatic film targeting black audiences. Whether it's a greedy urban drama, a script about a black couple or a black family, or even a fluffy inner city dance movie, you can almost bet that by the film's end you will see a violent beatdown or a murder. And the same intense motive flows without censorship through rap lyrics, TV shows, and video games. Family violence, the murder of our youth, hair-triggered sadism, and apathy toward the disproportionate rates of violence, the major forces of homicide, are non-insurmountable challenges. The cycle of self-destruction and violence can and must be broken. What follow tools that may help us meet these challenges? Positive propaganda cues to halt homicide. Life, because we're all worth it. All too often we think that life is worthless and that we cannot recover from our pain. What we must realize is that we is worth sticking around because with hope, we never know how far we can go. The first step towards saving lives is to appreciate the value of our own. Turn a life intention into a life intention. Part of what creates our stress and disconnection with humanity is that we do not feel we have a purpose in life. If we can take the negative energy, tension, and turn it into a positive energy, intention, then there is a great chance for our recovery. Distress. We must get over the stress and anger that keep us killing one another and keeping us from reaching our full potentials as human beings. Life is a prerequisite to everything else. Value it. The finality of death precludes any hope for positive change. Stay alive so that you have a chance to truly live. It's as simple as that. Futures, no funerals, not funerals. Our silence must be broken. Inaction must be reversed. And the values of every black life must be reinforced. Woozy Alalusa may be gone, but his organization, Pioneers for Peace, lives on. There are dozens of others across the nations working desperately to offer alternatives to the drug trade and gang violence. Seek them out, support their efforts. Let's make a commitment to be just as loud as just as angry about death related to black on black violence as to white on black crime. Even if it's not captured on video, as was the young Darion Alberts murder. We need to be just as vigilant and engaged about the murder of a black child by another black child as we were about a Harvard professor who was disrespected and inconvenienced by a white police officer. To accomplish this new orientation, we need a black media machine, be it internet or cable-based, that overwhelms us with the faces, stories, and circumstances of every murdered child. If 20 young black children die in a week, imagine seeing 20 stories that week stressing their values of the community's loss. Imagine passionate conversations about the unnecessary death of black children. After violence in Chicago claimed the lives of 22 students, 20 by gun violence, in the 2000 through 2008 school years, parents volunteered to provide safe passage to and from school for their children. High school students and school administrators took to the streets protesting the killings. Those of us freed from the shackles of helplessness and inferiority must multiply such efforts. Our mantra such matched the rallying cry of those Chicago parents, students, and educators. We want futures, not funerals.